In the season finale, Beck is in the cage and Joe is on the outside trying to convince her that everything he did was for her. She's crying, saying, please tell me you didn't kill Benji. Tell me you didn't kill Peach. Tell me I'm crazy. But to better explain himself, he wants to go get some evidence to show her. So he leaves Mooney's, and as he does, he texts her friends from Beck's cell phone saying, hey, I'm going on a literary retreat. I'll talk to you guys in a couple days, just so they don't start getting suspicious when she doesn't answer them. When Joe arrives at his apartment, he's shocked to find that Claudia is being wheeled out because she has a concussion. And it's clear to not only Joe, but also the police on who did it. It's Ron. But Claudia won't press charges and won't tell the cops what really happened. She just says it's an accident. Joe wants to know where Paco is, but the police haven't seen him, and that's pretty concerning to Joe. But Joe gets the evidence that he needs, and he heads back to Mooney's. He starts explaining himself to Beck, showing Beck how bad of a person Benji was because he killed somebody in college. Then he shows what a psychopath Peach was because she had all these photos of Beck for years and years and years. She asks, well, whose teeth are they? And he says it was Benji's, and she starts crying. Then she gets a hold of herself and says, and what about Peach? And he says, well, I mean, that was self-defense. I mean, she was going to kill me. And Beck absolutely loses it. She's very distraught and very mad at Joe. So when she falls asleep, he sneaks into the cage and gives her a blanket and a typewriter and some paper to make it nice and cozy for her. But she doesn't want these gifts. She wants to leave, and she's still pretty pissed off. But he's still convinced that she just doesn't understand and she one day will. When Joe heads upstairs, he hears a commotion because Paco has snuck into Mooney's and is trying to steal a gun, and Ethan has caught him. So Joe takes him into the office and explaining to him what a stupid move that is, but Paco doesn't want to hear it, and in fact it just pisses him off even more, and he storms out. But Joe has a bigger issue because the girls are still texting Beck, so he decides to nip that in the bud and runs over to the coffee place they're at and says, hey, have you guys heard from Beck? We had a big fight and I haven't heard from her since. Both Lynn and Annika laugh it off like, yeah, she's at a retreat. We haven't heard from her either. Don't sweat it. But then Lynn asks, what was the fight about? And Joe says, I found out she was cheating on me with her therapist. They both seem legitimately shocked and say they had no idea. And Annika is especially surprised because she really thought those two were meant to be together. She tells Joe, I've known Beck a long time. I've never seen her this happy. I truly believe that you bring out the best in her. So she probably really is on that writing retreat. And then Lynn says, or she's trying to dodge that private investigator. And this is the first time Joe's heard about the private investigator, so he wants more info. So they tell him how the Salingers don't believe that Peach could ever commit suicide, so they hired a private investigator to look into her death. So Joe knows that that's a potential problem. That night, he heads back to Mooney's to give Beck some Chinese food for dinner, and she seems to be doing a lot better. She seems way more understanding of his position, and she really needs to go to the bathroom and ask Joe, look, can you just let me go to the bathroom? Doing it in a bucket in this cell, it's just inhumane. Just trust me and let me go to the bathroom like a human being. And Joe is about to do it until he catches her glancing at the stairs. And when she does that, he says, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And that's when she loses it again, yelling and saying, how could I not see these signs? Joe tells her that if you see this place as a prison, that's all it's going to be. But if you see this place as a place for growth, then we have a future together. So you say you're a writer, there's a typewriter, there's paper, write. And with nothing else to do, she writes this story about how growing up, she hated rich girls. But then when she got older, she surrounded herself with them, trying to get in their inner circle, and she hated herself for it. And every guy that she ever let into her body, she learned more and more that she didn't have that special power to turn them from a beast to Prince Charming. And Joe is really no different. And while she's writing this story, Joe tries to cover his tracks. So he heads to her apartment and he's taking out items that would possibly incriminate him in a future crime. And while he thinks nobody's seeing him, the private investigator is outside of her apartment and finds it fishy that he's there. After leaving her apartment, he heads to the hospital to see Claudia and is wondering where Paco is, but Claudia has no idea. He says, how do you not know? Isn't the job of a mother to protect her son? She says, wait, who the hell are you? You have no idea what I'm going through. Ron is connected. And if I try to stand up to him, he takes away my kid. And Joe feels really bad about this because he had no idea. The next day, as he's doing daily errands, Joe is approached by that private investigator from Peach's family. And he's asking how well he knew Peach and does he know of any information about her death? Has he ever been to the Greenwich household? And Joe says, yeah, I knew her through my ex-girlfriend, Beck. You should probably track down her. And he says, that's funny because I've been trying to, but I have no idea where she is. Hey, by the way, do you often go to her house when she's not in town? He says, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was dropping off her key. So at this point, Joe is pretty concerned, but he gets more concerned when the private investigator lets him know that they have an item from the Greenwich house and they're testing it for DNA. And immediately Joe knows that it is the jar that he pissed in, and he's cursing himself for not taking that jar with him. But if there's one thing he learned from Mr. Mooney, it's even when you're caught, just act cool and act calm. But the private investigator doesn't buy any of it, and Joe knows it. So when he heads back to Mooney's that day, he's clearly flustered and Beck can sense it. Beck asks what's wrong and he tells her how the PI is snooping around and maybe she'll get her wish because if this thing comes back with his DNA, he's gonna go to jail. Beck tells him that that's not what she wants. She doesn't want him arrested because what would happen to Paco? Joe is all that kid has. So let's try to figure out a way where we can get out of this. But since Paco doesn't have any help, he's taking it upon himself to take care of the Ron issue. He takes a baseball bat to Ron and while he knocks him down, he doesn't knock him out and Ron comes after him. Paco hides in the garden that's across the street and Ron is inching closer and closer until all of a sudden Joe pops up out of nowhere and stabs him in the neck. Paco is definitely in shock over this, and Joe says, look, I need you to pull it together. This is what's going to happen. You go and clean up the blood that's in the hallway. I'm going to get rid of the body, but I'm also going to take his cell phone and start texting your mom and texting a couple of his friends so it looks like he's still alive. But Ron is never going to bother you guys again. Ron was a bad guy, and sometimes bad people die. When Joe gets back to Mooney's later, Beck thinks she's taking care of the issue because she's written a story where she basically switches Joe with Dr. Nikki. She tells him that this is our way out. We release this story and we plant the evidence and boom, we're free to be together. Both are smiling and happy and she tells Joe that she loves him and if they weren't separated by this glass wall, this is the time where the two would kiss. So Joe opens the door, goes into the cage and the two start kissing, but then out of the corner of his eye he notices that she's taking apart the typewriter and then all of a sudden she stabs him in the side and runs up the steps. But the issue is there's another locked door. As she starts screaming for help, Paco shows up and she starts yelling at him that Joe's a killer, he's killed people, he's gonna kill her, I need help. But Paco feels a sense of loyalty to Joe and he just leaves. So Beck heads back down the stairs to find the keys, but what she finds is that Joe is no longer in the cage. When she turns around, there's Joe and he tells her there's one thing he's learned from the years of being locked into the cage by Mr. Mooney, it's to always hide a spare key. She runs in the back and hits Joe over the head with a mallet and grabs the keys and heads upstairs and is frantically trying to find the right one, but she runs out of time and Joe grabs her. We fast forward 4 months later where Joe has killed Beck. He hid her body at Dr. Nikki's along with the box of mementos and sent that story that she wrote to Blythe, who forwarded it to her agent who published it. And the story is a huge hit. Dr. Nikki has been charged with her murder and Joe can't keep her book on the shelf fast enough. And while most of the world is convinced that Dr. Nikki was the killer, not everyone's convinced. That private investigator thinks it's complete bullshit. So while Joe is pretty disappointed about what could have been for the relationship, he's patting himself on the back for finally making her the writer that she always wanted to be. A successful one. And while he definitely did not help Beck the way he thinks, he did help Paco and Claudia. And Claudia has gotten a new job in California and the two are moving. And while he's going to really miss Paco, he's just happy that the two will be safe. But the next day at the bookstore as he's setting up Beck's display, a girl walks in and she immediately catches his eye just like Beck did. And as he gets closer and closer to her, she turns around and to his utter shock, it's Candace. He goes, oh my God, and she goes, alive. And we have a lot to talk about. And that is how season 1 of You ends. Please subscribe to this channel. If you got this far, I'm assuming you liked the video, so give it a thumbs up. If you thought this video sucked, give it a thumbs down. Feel free to say whatever in the comments section. I don't read it because it's a cesspool. You know, it'll be like 100 nice comments, but the one mean one, it'll make me feel bad. So I just avoid it. But thank you so much for watching.